Everyone told her to pull the trees. She left every single one standing. 47 apple trees, every one killed in a single night of black frost. Dale Merriweather leaned on his county truck and told her the smart move. She closed the journal, looked him in the eye, and said, "The orchard stays." Ellie snapped the journal shut. The leather cover, cracked at the spine, a short pencil still tucked into the binding, met her palm with a sound like a door closing. She looked straight at Dale Merriweather, who stood on her porch with that beige plastic clipboard pressed against his chest like a shield, his wire-rimmed reading glasses pushed up on his forehead where they always lived when he wasn't squinting at county forms. And she said 4 words. "The orchard stays." Dale shifted his weight to one hip. That patient half-smile, sandy blonde hair combed neatly to the right, thinning at the temples, and a ruddy flush creeping up his soft cheeks the way it always did when someone in the valley didn't take his advice the first time. He tapped the clipboard once with his index finger. "Ellie, sweetheart, I've been doing this 23 years. Those trees are dead, every single one of them." Sweetheart. Like she was 12. Like she hadn't just buried her grandfather 6 months ago and held this land together with both hands since. He wasn't wrong about the trees. That was the hell of it. The black frost of March 1991 had been the worst in 40 years. Temperatures plunging to 11 degrees Fahrenheit and holding there for 9 consecutive hours. 9 hours. Howard Groves had planted those 47 Gravenstein and Honeycrisp apple trees in 1961, back when Eisenhower was still warm in everyone's memory, and the soil along this stretch outside Ashland, Oregon, was cheap enough that a man with a grafting knife and a philosophy could buy 12 acres and make them mean something. 30 years of growth. 30 years of careful pruning, of hand pollination in wet springs, of thinning fruit so the branches wouldn't crack under their own generosity. And then, one night in March, the cold split every tree's cambium layer, that thin living tissue just beneath the bark where all the growing happens, like a thumbnail cracking a walnut. Dead. All 47. Dale ran through his pitch the way a man recites a grocery list. Clear-cut the deadwood. Apply for the federal disaster relief grant, $4,200, enough to replant with cold hardy rootstock. Start over. And then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned a developer named Harlan who'd been buying failed orchards in the Rogue Valley at $1,800 an acre. $21,600 for the whole property. A clean exit. "Harlan's a reasonable man," Dale said. "He'd let you stay through the summer, get your things in order." Let her stay. On her own land. Through the summer. Like a guest being given a polite deadline. Ellie pulled a loose strand of dark auburn hair behind her ear and said nothing. Her gray-green eyes held his, steady as a fence post. Dale waited. She didn't fill the silence. He finally shook his head, that slow, pitying shake people reserve for someone they've already written off, and walked back to his county truck. The 3 faint freckles below his right ear caught the morning light as he turned. He drove off down Rogue River Road, trailing a thin line of gravel dust. He wasn't the last to weigh in. Within a week, 2 neighbors had already started calling the dead orchard an eyesore. 47 trees standing bone gray against the Oregon sky, bark peeling in long strips, branches reaching up like they were asking a question nobody wanted to answer. One neighbor, a cattle rancher named Stu Pallard, 3 properties south, actually filed a complaint with the county about fire hazard. Dead wood, dry timber, potential liability. Ellie didn't argue with any of them. She walked into the farmhouse and shut the door. The house still smelled like Howard. cedar shavings and black coffee and the faint iron tang of well water. His wide-blade grafting knife sat on the mantel in its leather belt sheath, the walnut handle worn smooth by decades of use. Along the south wall, floor to ceiling, stood the shelves, hand-labeled notebooks going back to 1962. Soil composition, rainfall logs, pollination records, graft success rates. Every notebook in Howard's careful block print, every margin filled with observations that read more like philosophy than agriculture. Ellie pulled one from the shelf. 1978. She'd been looking for something specific, a memory, half-formed, of Howard talking about a windstorm that had knocked down a dozen apple limbs one October. She found the entry on page 43. Howard had tried growing shiitake mushrooms on the downed wood. He'd drilled holes, packed in spawn, sealed them with wax. The experiment had mostly failed. Too much direct sunlight, not enough moisture control, and he'd used a strain poorly suited to apple. But the entry ended with a line that stopped her cold. The wood wants to become something else. Let it. She read it twice. Then she closed the notebook and drove to Medford. The public library in Medford had exactly one relevant document, a 1985 USDA bulletin on log culture shiitake production, tucked between pamphlets on drip irrigation and bovine mastitis. Ellie fed dimes into the photocopier and walked out with 11 pages of dense technical data. Here's what mattered. Shiitake spawn ran about $18 per 100 dowel bag. Each 4-foot log needed between 30 and 50 dowels, drilled and inserted. A properly inoculated hardwood log could fruit for 3 to 6 years, sometimes longer if the moisture stayed between 35 and 45%. Apple wood wasn't the ideal substrate. Oak was better, but apple could work. The bulletin said so in a footnote on page 7, almost as an afterthought. Almost as an afterthought. That's where the real information always hides. Back at the kitchen table that evening, Ellie picked up the phone and dialed a spawn supplier in Olympia, Washington. She ordered 4,000 dowel plugs of Lentinula edodes, strain WR46. The total came to $312. The woman on the line was pleasant, efficient, and asked a reasonable question. How many logs did Ellie have? Ellie looked out the kitchen window. 47 dead apple trees stood in the failing light, their split bark silver as old bone. I'm about to have around 800. The woman paused. Then she read back the shipping address and hung up. 3 nights later, the dowels arrived in 2 cardboard boxes. Ellie sat at the kitchen table under the single overhead bulb, drove the first hickory dowel plug into a freshly drilled oak practice log. Shiitake spawn packed tight inside the hole, pale and fibrous, smelling faintly of grain, and opened her grandfather's journal to a page headed Inoculation Rates, Mycelium per board foot. She stood at the base of the first dead Gravenstein with Howard's bow saw in her right hand and a cloth tape in her left, measuring 4-foot sections up the trunk with the kind of deliberate patience that makes watching paint dry look like a NASCAR event. The saw was a relic, a 28-inch blade with a tension rod her grandfather had kept oiled and sharp for 40 years, the hickory handle worn smooth and dark from his grip. His journal said it plainly. A clean tooth leaves a clean wound. A chainsaw rips and crushes the wood fibers, opens the grain to contamination. A sharp cross-cut bow saw leaves a surface so clean you could press your thumb to it and feel individual growth rings like Braille. So that's what Ellie used on every single tree. 47 dead Gravensteins, 19 days of work. Alone. She started before 7 each morning, her dark auburn hair pulled back in that loose, low ponytail, a few strands escaping around her temples by the time she'd finished the first cut. The olive green canvas jacket came off by 9, By noon, her cream-colored Henley was dark with sweat between the shoulder blades. Each tree yielded somewhere between 12 and 22 usable logs, depending on trunk diameter. The bigger ones gave her sections 5 and 6 inches across, the younger plantings closer to 4. She bucked every trunk, every major limb, hauled every log by hand to the barn, stacked them on pallets to let the moisture stabilize. The battered field journal rode in her back pocket, the pencil stub tucked into the cracked spine, and she tallied every piece. 793 usable logs, 4 feet long, 4 to 6 inches in diameter. That was the raw material. Now here's where it gets technical, and honestly, this is the part that matters. The inoculation process is tedious and precise and beautiful in the way that only deeply boring work can be beautiful. Ellie clamped a depth-stop collar onto a 7/16" drill bit, the collar set to exactly 1 1/4 inches deep, no more, no less. She drilled holes in a diamond pattern every 6 inches along the length of each log. Into every hole, she tapped a spawn-loaded birch dowel plug with a rubber mallet. 30 to 50 plugs per log, depending on length and diameter. Then she sealed each plug with melted cheese wax, 65 cents a pound from a dairy surplus outlet down in Grants Pass. Applied with a cheap foam brush, the wax heated in an old double boiler on a camp stove set up on the barn floor. Her hands cramped after the first 50 logs. The drill torqued against knots and sent vibrations up through her wrist, and the mallet work was worse. Repetitive, metronomic, the kind of motion that turns your forearm into a single throbbing knot by evening. She built a jig from scrap 2x4s to hold the logs steady so she wasn't wrestling them with one hand and drilling with the other. Smart fix. Simple fix. The kind of thing nobody teaches you. You just hurt enough to figure it out. But here's where Ellie learned something the hard way. She stacked the first 200 logs in the barn, tight rows, close together, because that seemed efficient, seemed tidy, seemed like the right way to store things. 10 days later, she walked in and saw it. Green mold blooming across 40 logs like someone had spray painted them. Trichoderma, a competing fungus that eats the same sapwood the shiitake mycelium needs. It looked like failure made visible. She nearly threw up. $16 in spawn, 19 hours of drilling and plugging and waxing. Gone. She called the spawn supplier from the kitchen phone, standing at the counter with the birthmark on her inner left wrist catching the light as she gripped the receiver. The man on the other end was patient. 3 to 4 inches between logs, he said. 80% shade, ambient airflow, not wind, not stillness, but the kind of gentle drift you get under a canopy. She'd suffocated them, packed them in like cordwood and sealed their fate. Those 40 logs went to the burn pile. Ellie adjusted. And this is where the dead orchard saved her. She carried the remaining logs outside, between the standing trunks of the Gravensteins she'd already bucked, those bare vertical columns of dead wood still rooted in the ground, their branches stripped, providing exactly the right dappled shade. She built lean-to crib stacks, each log angled against a crosspiece with 4 inches of breathing room on every side. The dead orchard became a nursery for its own wood. There's something almost poetic about that, if you're the kind of person who finds poetry in fungus and failure. Most of the county found something else in it entirely. Bill Crenshaw, alfalfa farmer, loudmouth, drove a rust-orange Ford that you could hear a half-mile out. He slowed down on the county road one afternoon and just stared. Rows of waxed logs standing upright between dead tree trunks. He told everyone at the Rogue River Feed and Supply that the Groves girl was building a fort out of firewood. People laughed. Of course they laughed. And then Dale Merriweather showed up again. Pale blue eyes, patient half-smile, that damn beige clipboard pressed against his chest like a shield. He walked the property line, made notes, pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up onto his forehead, and informed Ellie in his most reasonable voice that the parcel was now classified as non-producing agricultural land. "Sweetheart, I don't make the rules," he said, tapping the clipboard with one soft finger. "But if you're not producing a commodity crop on this acreage, the tax board's going to reclassify you residential. That's a different number entirely." Sweetheart. Like she was something to be managed. Ellie looked at him with those gray-green eyes and said nothing. He waited. She didn't fill the silence. He shifted his weight to the other hip, cleared his throat, and left. That evening she sat on an overturned bucket between the log stacks at dusk, Howard's journal open on her knee. She read one line aloud into the cooling air. "Waste is just a resource, waiting for the right question." Her grandfather's handwriting, slanted and sure. She tore the page out carefully and taped it to the barn wall where she could see it every morning. The mycelium needed 6 to 12 months to colonize the sapwood. Invisible work. Ellie checked moisture with a $12 pin-style meter from the hardware store in Gold Hill. Ideal range was 35 to 45%. She rigged a gravity-fed drip line off the old orchard irrigation, set it to run 15 minutes of mist every other day. $40 a month in water. $40 she almost didn't have. She stacked the last waxed log in the shade structure under the canopy of the dead orchard. 793 inoculated logs standing in lean-to crib stacks between the trunks, and the orchard looked like a strange library of wood. She opened the journal to a blank page and wrote in small, steady letters, "Now we wait." 9 months after inoculation, Ellie walks the rows on a February morning and sees the first pinheads, tiny brown nubs pushing through the bark of log number 37. She almost misses them. The lights barely up, fog sitting low in the dead orchard like wet cotton, and she's doing what she's done every morning since May. Walking the rows, checking moisture, looking for contamination, finding nothing. 9 months of nothing. 9 months of neighbors driving past slow enough to stare at the strange library of waxed logs standing between dead apple trunks. 9 months of Dale Merriweather's patient half-smile whenever he saw her at the feed store, his wire-rimmed glasses pushed up on his thinning, sandy blonde hair, that beige clipboard tucked against his chest like a shield. 9 months of him not even bothering to ask how the mushroom project was going, because the silence was the insult, the assumption that she'd quit. She didn't quit. And now, log 37, 4th row, 2nd stack from the east end. The pinheads are the size of pencil erasers, pushing through a drill hole she'd plugged with wax back in May. The color of strong coffee. She touches one with her fingertip and the texture stops her cold, like wet suede curled at the edges. Alive. She pulls the battered leather-bound field journal from her back pocket, the cracked spine flexing open to a blank page, and writes exactly what she sees. First fruiting, log 37. Pinheads at 3 inoculation sites, like wet suede, curled at the edges, the color of strong coffee. Then she walks every single row. 23 logs out of 753 survivors are showing pins. 23. 3%. It's not a flood. It's a whisper. But here's the thing about shiitake mycelium. It whispers before it shouts. The sequence that triggered this flush was specific. A run of cool nights, temperatures dropping to around 40 degrees, followed by a warm rain 2 days before. The mycelium had been colonizing silently through the sapwood for months, breaking down lignin, building its network through the heartwood. The cool snap told it winter was real. The warm rain told it winter was ending. And the organism did what organisms do when they sense the window closing. It fruited to survive, to throw spores before the season turned. Ellie harvests by hand. She pulls Howard's wide-blade grafting knife from the leather belt sheath she's worn every day since June, the walnut handle worn smooth by her grandfather's palm, now warming to hers, and cuts each stem flush to the bark. Clean cuts, no tearing. Tearing opens the log to contamination, invites green mold into the sapwood, kills the run. She learned that from page 41 of the journal, Howard's handwriting, in pencil. Cut clean. The log remembers every wound. First day yield, 2.3 pounds from 23 logs. She holds the mushrooms in both hands. They weigh almost nothing. They smell like the forest floor after October rain, earthy, faintly sweet, with a sharpness underneath like cracked walnut shells. 2.3 pounds. After 9 months. She doesn't know what to charge. The call to the Olympia supplier costs her 35 cents a minute on the kitchen phone. He tells her retail shiitake moves for $12 to $16 a pound at farmers markets, 8 to 10 wholesale to restaurants. Good news. Then the bad news. Freshness is everything. Shiitake lose value after 48 hours. The gills darken, the caps dry, the texture goes from meaty to papery. She needs cold chain or same-day delivery. She has neither. 10 days later, the second flush hits. Bigger. 8.7 pounds from 61 logs. The mycelium is spreading through the stacks, log to log, the network thickening. Logs that showed nothing in February are suddenly pushing caps the size of silver dollars. She starts soaking the reluctant logs, the ones still silent, in a stock tank of cold water for 24 hours. Force fruiting. Shocking. You convince the wood it's drowning, that conditions have turned catastrophic, and the mycelium panics. It fruits to survive, to get its spores into the air before the host dies. Howard's journal has a marginal note next to a sketch of a soaking trough. Cold shock. The wood thinks it's dying. It fruits to survive. Ellie underlines it with the short pencil tucked into the binding. The dead man's voice, still teaching. By the third week, she's got 11 pounds of perfect shiitake and nowhere to sell them. First failure at market. She drives the truck 40 minutes to the Ashland Saturday Farmers Market, mushrooms packed in a waxed cardboard flat lined with damp newspaper, and gets stopped at the entrance by a woman with a clipboard. Vendor permit. $85 for the season. Applications closed 2 months ago. Ellie sits in the truck with 11 pounds of perfect mushrooms going stale by the hour and no outlet. So she pivots. Same morning, same town. She starts knocking on kitchen doors. First restaurant. No. The chef doesn't even look at the mushrooms, just waves her off through the screen door. Second restaurant. No. They already have a produce supplier, thanks. Third kitchen. A place called Thistle and Rye, tucked into a converted brick building on a side street. Small. Farm to table. A chef named Marco comes to the back door wiping his hands on a side towel, looks at her like she's selling encyclopedias, and then she opens the flat. He picks up a cap, smells it, bends it between his thumb and forefinger, testing moisture content, checking that it flexes without cracking, that it hasn't started to dry. The cap bends and springs back. He looks at the gills. Pale, clean, no darkening. He smells it again. He buys all 11 pounds at $10 a pound, $110 cash. He counts it out from a register in the kitchen and tells her something that changes the math on everything. If she can bring 20 pounds a week he'll commit to a standing order. 20 pounds a week, times $10, 200 a week, 10,400 a year, from 1 acre of dead trees. Howard's best apple year. His best year, peak production, no frost damage, no codling moth, grossed $6,100 from that same acre. She's looking at nearly doubling it, with dead wood, with waste. She packs her first harvest, 11 pounds of shiitake, into a waxed cardboard flat lined with damp newspaper, loads it into the truck, and drives toward Ashland with no buyer lined up and no plan beyond knocking on kitchen doors. 11 pounds of shiitake got her in the door. That first week, she came home with $110 in crumpled bills from a chef who'd never heard her name before. And now, Ellie sits at the kitchen table with every one of those dollars fanned out beside Howard's field journal, a yellow legal pad in front of her, and a pencil stub working out numbers that would make an accountant squint. Yield per log, flush cycle per species, revenue per pound per week per month. She's drawing grids by hand because she doesn't own a computer, and honestly, the grids are better. She can feel the pattern forming under the pencil tip the way you feel grain direction when you run your thumb along a split stave. Spring of 1992, and the system needs to scale. She divides the 753 inoculated logs into 4 groups, roughly 188 logs each. Every group gets a 24-hour cold soak on a rotating 3-week cycle, which means every single week, one group is shocking into fruiting while the others are resting, recovering, building mycelium density in the heartwood. Near continuous harvest, no dead weeks, no gaps where a restaurant calls and she's got nothing to sell. But she needs more soak capacity. One stock tank isn't enough for 188 logs at a time. Bill Crenshaw, a cattle rancher 2 properties north, is hauling an old galvanized stock trough to the dump. Ellie catches him on the road, asks what he wants for it. He looks at her truck, looks at the trough, laughs through his nose. $20, he says, then adds, loud enough for his passenger to hear, mushroom money. She hands him a 20. She doesn't smile. She doesn't not smile. She loads the trough herself, drives it home, and plumbs it with a garden hose and a drain valve she fabricates from PVC fittings. Total cost, including the 20, $31. Second soaking station, operational by April. Now the harvest climbs, but not evenly. Some weeks she pulls 25 pounds, others crater to 9. The inconsistency is maddening, and Ellie does the only thing Howard ever taught her to do with a problem she can't see. She writes everything down. Every log gets a line in the journal grid: species of wood, diameter, date inoculated, date of each soak, pounds harvested per flush. And there it is. The pattern she couldn't feel until the pencil showed it to her. The oak logs she cut from that windfall near the creek are outproducing the apple logs 3-to-1. It's not even close. Apple wood is softer, breaks down faster under the mycelium, gives maybe 2 good years of fruiting before the sapwood goes punky and the yields collapse. Oak is denser, slower to colonize, but once the shiitake take hold, those logs produce for 4 years. 5, sometimes. The oak is the backbone. The apple is the flash. She finds a sawmill in Jacksonville that sells cull oak, logs too knotty or too small for lumber, destined for firewood or the chipper. 40 cents a log, delivered. She orders 200. The sawmill guy doesn't laugh. He just takes her money and sends a flatbed. 953 logs now. The orchard looks less like a failed fruit operation and more like something else entirely. Something without a name in any county handbook. By midsummer, a second restaurant finds her. Stone Oven, a place in Medford with a wood-fired kitchen and a chef who knows what fresh shiitake are worth. 15 pounds a week at $11 a pound. Combined with the Ashland account, she's moving 35 pounds a week at an average of $10.50. Run rate revenue, roughly $19,000 a year. But don't let that number fool you. She's plowing every dime back in. Spawn, wax, water costs, truck fuel to make deliveries twice a week, and now those 200 oak logs. The yellow legal pad has 2 columns, revenue on the left, costs on the right, and they're running neck and neck like 2 horses nobody's betting on. Then Dale Merriweather shows up again. Same khaki chinos, same county seal on the breast pocket, same beige clipboard pressed against his chest like a shield he doesn't think he needs. Wire-rimmed glasses pushed up on his forehead because he only uses them for the fine print. And brother, Dale lives for fine print. He's got the county tax reassessment. See, the orchard parcels in the Rogue Valley carry a farm use tax deferral. Keeps property taxes low as long as the land is producing a recognized agricultural crop. Pears, apples, grapes, hay, cattle. The list is specific. And Ellie's 12 acres haven't produced a single piece of fruit in 2 years. The old trees are standing, sure, but they're scaffolding for mushroom logs, not agricultural production as the county defines it. Without the deferral, her property tax jumps from $410 a year to $2,200. Dale explains this the way he explains everything, patiently, slowly, with that half smile that never quite reaches his pale blue eyes. He's even brought the exemption application form. She could apply, he says, but the exemption requires documented sales of a recognized crop, and mushrooms grown on logs in a non-producing orchard don't appear anywhere in the county's category list. He shrugs, shifts his weight to one hip. I don't write the categories, Miss Groves. 4 words that sound like sympathy and function like a locked door. Ellie takes the form. She doesn't argue. She never argues. Dale walks back to his county truck and the clipboard catches the light for a second before he sets it on the passenger seat. Here's what Dale doesn't see, what no clipboard can measure. That shrug of his isn't one man's indifference. It's the whole system. Every category list, every form, every deferral designed for the way things have always been done. And if your way doesn't fit the form, then your way doesn't exist. Small gesture, catastrophic architecture. A shrug that can take a woman's land. On a night of hard rain in November 1992, she sits alone at the kitchen table, the legal pad covered in red ink numbers, the calculator showing she's $380 short on the property tax bill. And there beside the calculator, a letter from Harlan's Development Company offering $22,000 for the 12 acres. $22,000. Clean typed paragraphs. The easy path, spelled out in business-like font, sitting there calm as a promise. She could clear the tax bill, pay off the truck, have $14,000 left in the bank, rent a place in town, get a job at the nursery. Be done. She holds the letter a long time. Rain hits the kitchen window in sheets. Then she opens Howard's journal to the back cover, where he wrote in 1979 in that deliberate, slanted hand. Waste is just a resource waiting for the right question. She sets the letter face down, turns off the kitchen light, walks to the barn with a flashlight. The mushrooms are fruiting in the dark, pale caps pushing through rough oak bark, dozens of them, silent and certain. The proof is physical. It's always physical. Back at the table, she writes on the yellow legal pad in block letters, "The orchard is not for sale." She folds the Harlan letter, writes that single sentence across the bottom, slides it into the return envelope and seals it shut. The returned letter sits on Harlan's desk in town, and Ellie is back in the orchard at dawn, soaking the next rotation of logs. She never signed it, didn't even fold it back into the envelope. She just left it on the kitchen table overnight, and by morning it was under a coffee mug like a coaster, and she was pulling on her olive green canvas jacket, lacing up those scuffed brown boots, and walking into the dark, wet orchard with a headlamp and a 5-gallon bucket. $22,000. Clean typed paragraphs, the easy path, and she stepped right over it like a puddle in the driveway. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? Not a gamble, a wager. A gamble is blind. A wager means you've done the math, you've read the journal, you've watched the mycelium crawl through sapwood at a 1/4 inch per week, and you've decided the world is wrong and the fungus is right. That's where Ellie Groves stood in the winter of 1992. $380 short on her property tax, an offer letter she refused to sign, and 200 oak logs just starting to show their first pinheads of white along the drill sites. She wasn't guessing. She was reading the system, and the system was saying, wait. But the county wasn't interested in waiting. The tax bill didn't care about mycelium. So Ellie did something she'd never done. She went on offense. She sat down at Howard's old Underwood typewriter, the one with the sticky E key, and she typed a petition to the County Board of Agriculture. 14 pages of sales receipts from Thistle and Rye and Stone Oven Bakery, copies of every check she'd deposited, and tucked into the back, a photocopy of the USDA's 1989 classification of shiitake as a specialty forest product. Not a vegetable crop, not orchard fruit, a forest product, cultivated on deadwood substrate, which meant her land qualified for a timber and forestry exemption she'd been denied because Dale Merriweather had checked the wrong box on her assessment form. Accidentally, of course. Dale's mistakes were always accidental. The board was 3 older men in a fluorescent-lit conference room at the county annex. They took 6 weeks to rule. 6 weeks of Ellie hauling mushrooms to restaurants and pretending the letter from Harlan didn't exist, and watching her oak logs wake up. When the decision finally came, it was a single paragraph on county letterhead. Exemption granted. Retroactive to the current tax year. Dale Merriweather signed the form himself. Those pale blue eyes didn't blink. He didn't congratulate her. He didn't shake her hand. He clicked his pen, that same damn pen, pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up onto his thinning, sandy blonde hair and said, "You'll need to resubmit annually." Like she'd gotten away with something. Like this was a loophole, not a right. She said, "I'll need a receipt." 4 words, flat as a barn floor. And she waited, hand extended, until he printed one. By spring of 1993, the system was doing what Howard's Journal always said it would. Those first-generation apple logs, the ones she'd inoculated back in early '91, were now fruiting heavily, averaging 0.6 of a pound per log per flush, 4 to 5 flushes rolling through the year. The 200 oak logs joined the rotation with their first real harvest. Weekly yield stabilized between 40 and 55 pounds of dense, dark-capped shiitake with edges curled tight and gills still pale cream underneath. She added a 3rd restaurant account in Grants Pass, started selling small quantities at the Ashland Co-op, $14 a pound, retail. The woman who couldn't pay her taxes was now turning product faster than she could cut it, but freshness was killing her margins. Shiitake start losing moisture and flavor within 48 hours of harvest. She was driving a 100-mile loop 3 mornings a week just to keep everything under 2 days from log to kitchen. So she fixed it the way Howard would have fixed it, with salvage and arithmetic. Found a second-hand refrigeration compressor unit pulled from a decommissioned dairy truck outside Medford. $275. Bought 4-inch foam insulation panels from a building supply closeout, $190. Built a walk-in cold room in the northeast corner of the barn, tight against the stone foundation wall where the ground stayed cool year-round. The thing wasn't pretty. It looked like a giant white shoebox wedged between hay bales. But it held 38 degrees steady, and it stretched shelf life from 2 days to 7. 7 days changed everything. Now she could ship. She started packing mushrooms in waxed cardboard flats with gel ice packs, sealing them with packing tape, and sending them overnight freight to a specialty produce distributor in Portland. $9 a pound wholesale, less than restaurant direct, sure, but volume. 30 pounds per shipment, twice a week. That's $270 rolling in from Portland alone every single week, on top of her local accounts. Revenue crossed $35,000 that year, more than triple Howard's best apple year, and she knew the number because it was circled in his journal. The 1978 harvest, the last great year before the blight. $11,200. He'd written it with an exclamation point, the only one in the whole book. Ellie didn't use exclamation points. She paid off the truck, ordered 6,000 more dowel plugs from the supplier in Washington, and then she did something that would have made Howard laugh out loud. She started inoculating the old apple stumps still rooted in the ground, the ones she'd cut at the knee 2 years ago. She drilled into the tops, hammered in the wax-sealed plugs, and within 4 months, those stumps were fruiting from their flat crowns like they were wearing mushroom hats. Waste is just a failure of imagination. Even the stumps had something left to give. Down at the feed store, the conversation shifted. Bill Crenshaw stopped making his jokes about the mushroom girl. Not because he apologized. Bill Crenshaw will never apologize for anything in his natural life, but because the jokes stopped landing. Nobody laughed anymore. A young couple farming lavender 2 miles down the road, the Hanovers, drove up one afternoon and asked if she'd teach them the inoculation process. Ellie wiped her hands on her corduroys, that battered field journal tucked in her back pocket with the pencil still in the binding, and said, "Come by Saturday." Then, on a Tuesday morning in late September 1993, a rented sedan pulled up the gravel driveway trailing a cloud of dust. A woman stepped out. Dark hair, city shoes, a camera bag slung over one shoulder. She stood at the edge of the dead orchard and stared at the rows of fruiting logs, the crowns of mushrooms blooming from old stumps, the whole impossible system breathing quietly in the morning fog. Her name was Catherine Voss, and she wrote about food for a magazine in Portland, and the outside world had arrived. Catherine Voss walks the orchard rows with a notebook, photographing the log stacks and the fruiting caps, and Ellie's hands cutting a cluster at the stem. She doesn't ask Ellie to pose. She doesn't ask her to smile. She watches the small, pale birthmark on the inside of Ellie's left wrist as the grafting knife, Howard's grafting knife, the worn, walnut-handle dark with decades of grip, slices a shiitake cluster cleanly from the bark. The camera shutter clicks. Voss writes something in her notebook and underlines it twice. 3 weeks later, a Portland food magazine runs a 3,000-word feature titled "The Dead Orchard That Feeds the Valley." And it is, listen to me here, it is the kind of article that changes a zip code. Voss describes everything: the apple wood substrate, the forced fruiting rotation, the cold room with its tarp walls and salvaged cooler compressor, the battered leather-bound field journal small enough to fit a back pocket with its cracked spine and short pencil tucked into the binding. She describes the dead apple branches arching overhead like cathedral ribs, and beneath them, the dark caps emerging from inoculated logs in staggered waves. The photograph they run is Ellie standing among the stacks in her faded olive-green canvas work jacket, gray-green eyes looking not at the camera, but at a log she's checking. A few strands of dark auburn hair escaped from her ponytail and catching the light. She looks like exactly what she is, someone in the middle of working. 2 regional papers pick up the headline, then an agricultural blog, then a food sourcing newsletter that goes out to every farm-to-table restaurant kitchen on the West Coast. And the phone starts ringing. Within 3 weeks, Ellie has inquiries from 11 restaurants across Oregon and Northern California. Chefs who want her shiitake for risottos, for duxelle, for that dense, meaty sear you can only get from a slow-grown cap on real hardwood. They want volume. They want consistency. They want 150 pounds a week, minimum. Ellie can produce 55 to 60. So here it is. The scaling problem. Every small producer hits this wall. You can mortgage yourself, hire crew, build infrastructure, chase the demand curve until you're running a factory floor and your product tastes like every other product. Or you can stay tiny, stay precious, turn away 9 out of 11 calls, and hope the 2 you kept don't find someone cheaper next season. Ellie chooses neither. She chooses a third path, and it comes straight from Howard's journal. A page near the back written in pencil that's almost faded. The wood wants to become something else. Let it. She builds a cooperative. 4 neighboring farms have dead wood, coal piles, storm damage, timber they were going to burn or chip. Ellie drives to each one in the same truck Howard drove, and she doesn't pitch them a business plan. She shows them a log. She shows them the drill, the spawn, the wax. She trains each farmer personally, walking them through moisture protocols, spawn run times, the 14-day forced fruiting soak. Her curriculum is Howard's journal entries, read aloud in kitchens and barns, the old man's careful handwriting projected through her voice into 4 new sets of hands. She provides spawn at cost, shares her strain, buys their harvest at $7 a pound, and resells through her established channels at 10 to 12. The neighbors make money on wood they were going to burn. Ellie makes a margin on volume she couldn't grow alone. The quality stays consistent because every farmer learned the same way. From the journal, from the knife, from the hands. And then Dale Merriweather shows up again. Same khaki chinos, same tan suede loafers, still ridiculous for a gravel driveway. Same beige plastic clipboard pressed against his chest. But something's different. The wire-rimmed glasses are pushed up on his forehead the way they always are, and the patient half-smile is still there, but the smile is doing different work now. It's not patient. It's careful. He asks about spawn run times. He asks about moisture protocols. He asks about yield curves per log diameter. He writes everything down on his county form, his pale blue eyes tracking Ellie's hands as she demonstrates a soak rotation. He does not apologize. He does not acknowledge that 2 years ago he stood in this same orchard and told her to clear-cut it. He does not mention the word firewood. He simply fills out his clipboard and says, "This could help some other folks." Ellie nods. That's the apology. That's all she's ever going to get, and honestly, it's more than Dale Merriweather has ever given anyone. She takes it the way she takes everything, with her hands already moving to the next task. Here's what makes the system beautiful, and here's what makes the fertilizer reps and chemical salesmen completely, utterly irrelevant. Shiitake need no pesticide, no herbicide, no synthetic fertilizer. The logs do all the work, and when they're spent, 4-5 years after inoculation, they crumble. They decompose right into the orchard floor. Ellie measures the soil organic content beneath the oldest log stacks with a test kit and a notebook. When she started, the dead orchard floor read 1.1% organic matter. Pale, chalky, exhausted dirt. 3 years later, it reads 2.8%. That soil is dark. You can crumble it between your fingers and it holds together, then falls apart, then holds again. Living soil. Soil that smells like a forest floor after rain. The dead orchard is becoming some of the richest dirt in the valley, and nobody sold Ellie a single bag of anything to make it happen. She writes it down in the journal, in her own hand now, next to Howard's. The wood wants to become something else. It becomes soil. Revenue, year 3. Her personal operation grosses $42,000. The cooperative adds another $18,000 in margin. Total, $60,000 from 12 acres of dead trees. The county average gross for 12 acres of producing apples, living, healthy, sprayed, fertilized, irrigated apples, is $31,000. Let that sit for a second. Then a letter arrives. A restaurant group in San Francisco. They want 200 pounds per month of her shiitake, $12 a pound. It is the first order she cannot fill alone, even with the cooperative. Ellie reads it twice, sets it on the kitchen table, and picks up the phone to call the Lavender couple down the road. 5 years after the frost, Ellie walks the orchard in early morning light. The dead apple trunks are silver gray and draped in moss. The log stacks between them are dark and rich, some decomposing into soft humus, new logs stacked beside them in an ongoing rotation. The ground beneath her boots is black. But that was 1996. Let me take you further. By 2001, a full decade has passed since the frost that killed Howard Groves' orchard, and everyone in the Rogue Valley said the land was done. Ellie is 34 now. Silver threads have started weaving through the dark auburn hair she still pulls back in that same loose ponytail, a few strands escaping at the temples the way they always have. Same olive green canvas jacket, worn softer at the elbows. Same scuffed brown boots. Same battered leather-bound field journal in her back pocket with the short pencil tucked into the cracked binding. The woman has not changed. The world around her has. That phone call to the Lavender couple became a second call, then a third, then a meeting at somebody's kitchen table with bad coffee and a county map spread out between plates. 9 farms across the Rogue Valley now produce shiitake, lion's mane, and oyster mushrooms on dead orchard wood under the cooperative Ellie built. No formal name, no logo, no mission statement. Just a handshake network of people who learned her inoculation methods and agreed on quality standards. Combined annual revenue across those 9 operations, $280,000. Ellie's personal take from the original 12 acres, $95,000 a year. From dead wood. From a frost everyone called a funeral. And here's the part that would have made Howard laugh until he cried. Walk those 12 acres now. The first-generation apple logs, the ones she drilled and plugged and stacked and soaked back in 1991, are gone. Not rotted away like garbage, dissolved, returned. The mycelium broke them down over years into a humus so dark and fine it looks like coffee grounds. Ellie pulled a soil sample that spring and sent it to the Oregon State Extension Lab. Organic matter content, 4.3%, among the highest readings in Jackson County. Remember where she started? Pale soil you could mistake for chalk dust? Now it crumbles between her fingers like chocolate cake, dark and alive with microbial activity, holding moisture the way a sponge holds water. She planted new apple trees into that soil, cold-hardy Geneva rootstock, a variety Howard never had access to, bred for exactly the kind of climate volatility that killed his orchard. Those young trees are growing faster and healthier than anything Howard ever planted, their root systems threading through soil so rich with fungal networks that the trees are essentially plugged into a living nutrient highway. Dead wood fed the soil. Soil feeds the trees. Trees will eventually die and become new logs. The system is self-renewing. It doesn't need inputs. It doesn't need Dale Merriweather's clipboard, or his county-approved chemical amendments, or his smug little half-smile. Speaking of Dale, he retired in 1999, took his beige clipboard and his tan suede loafers and his wire-rimmed glasses and went home to a pension. Nobody threw him a party. The county replaced him with a younger agent who, on her first visit to Ellie's orchard, stood in the rows between the fruiting logs and the young apple trees and said quietly, "This is the most productive dead acreage I've ever seen." Ellie just handed her a mushroom and kept walking. One Saturday morning that same year, a truck pulled up the gravel drive. Bill Crenshaw climbed out, hat in his hands, literally. The man who'd leaned on his fence and called this a firewood fort, who'd laughed loud enough for the whole road to hear. He stood in Ellie's yard with his John Deere cap held against his chest like he was at a viewing. His pear orchard had lost 30 trees to fire blight, dead wood everywhere. He asked if she'd help him inoculate it. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't smile. She walked to the barn and came back with 500 dowel plugs in a paper bag, a jar of sealing wax, and a photocopy of 3 pages from Howard's journal, the pages on drill depth, diamond spacing, and moisture management. She put them in his hands and said, "Start with a diamond pattern, 6 inches apart. Call me when you're ready to soak." 9 words. A closed door that was also an open one. Bill Crenshaw drove away with everything he needed to turn his disaster into a crop. He never apologized. He didn't have to. He showed up. That was enough. Now let me show you the last piece. Ellie's grandnephew Thomas is 19, tall, quiet, built like Howard was built, broad through the shoulders, thin at the waist. He's been working the orchard summers since he turned 18, learning the forced fruiting cycle, the moisture readings, the cold soak timing that triggers pin formation. Ellie teaches the way Howard taught, through hands, not lectures. She puts the drill in Thomas's grip and lets him feel the resistance change when the bit passes through sapwood into heartwood. She makes him crouch beside a log stack at dawn and read the moisture meter until he can guess the number before it appears on the screen. One evening in October, she sits him down at the kitchen table and slides a new field journal across to him. Blank, leather-bound, a pencil tucked into the binding. On the first page, in her handwriting, the same gray, green-eyed woman who once read these words in her dead grandfather's hand, she has written, "Waste is just a resource waiting for the right question." Thomas picks up the pencil, writes his first entry. Log counts, moisture readings, a note about a cluster of lion's mane fruiting earlier than expected on a white oak bolt in the north row. His own observations. His own hand. The chain continues. The orchard in long light. Young apple trees growing between silver-gray stumps. Dark soil visible between the rows. Mushroom caps fruiting on fresh oak logs in the shade. Thomas walking the rows with the journal in his back pocket and the pencil tucked in the binding. Ellie watches from the porch, arms crossed, Howard's wide-blade grafting knife resting on the rail beside her. The faint birthmark on the inside of her left wrist catches the last sun. The people who laughed are quiet. The soil is dark. The land is fed. The camera holds on the journal lying open on the kitchen table, Howard's handwriting on one page, Ellie's on the facing page, and below Ellie's, a newer hand, less steady, just learning. The next entry in a book that never closes. The refrain one last time, spoken quietly. Waste is just a resource, waiting for the right question. The next time you see a dead orchard, a failed field, a pile of wood everyone says is worthless, ask yourself the question Howard Groves wrote in 1978 and his granddaughter proved in 1991. What is this wood waiting to become?